So the Special Investigating Unit has now received the green light to probe allegations of corruption and maladministration in the agreement between the SABC and Gupta-Owned TNA Media over the so-called TNA Breakfast Briefings. This comes after President Cyril Ramaphosa signed a proclamation earlier this month. Now, the proclamation authorizes the SIU to investigate serious maladministration in connection with the affairs of the SABC in respect of these briefings, which were hosted and broadcasted on the public broadcaster and allegedly funded by state institutions. Let's get a better understanding of this. Bring in SIU Spokesperson Kaizer Kganyago, who's with us via our video link. Mr. Kganyago, great to have you on the SABC. Thanks as always for making time to help us understand these sometimes complex issues. Let's get a sense as a start just what this proclamation allows you to do now, which perhaps you wouldn't have been able to do before it was signed.
Yeah, maybe good morning, Ayanda, and good morning to your viewers. Maybe let us take this thing backwards. The SIU has been investigating in the SABC for a while. There were different proclamations that we're dealing with. Then in the process of doing that work, we came across this particular transaction, and at the time, because it was not covered by the proclamation, it could not be investigated. Therefore, the SIU then put a proclamation together, sent it to the president. It was only signed and gazetted on last Friday, and that is where we are going to then start the investigation. We are going to look into the relationship or the contracts between TNA Media and the SABC, and over and above that, we are going to look into the companies that also contributed to this to the breakfast. Companies like Eskom and Transnet and Petro SA and so on, and the departments that were involved to check whether that transactions that or the sponsorship that they made, was it done properly, whether there was value for money for it, and all of that. And all of that will come out at the end of this investigation.
Sure. Does it matter at all that TNA is no longer in operation? I mean, the newspaper was discontinued. I understand some of the Gupta-owned companies were, of course, repurposed. ANN7 came about at some stage, and I think Afro Worldview after that. But still, all of those entities have ceased to exist, at least in the form that they did at the time. In what ways could that complicate whatever result comes at the end of this investigation?
Yes, it will not so much complicate it, because we will come to a conclusion whether the transactions were lawful or unlawful, and then from there, at the end of the investigation, we will then determine culpability, whether there are people who should have done things that they did not do and so on, and what are the consequences for those people. Therefore, at that time, we will determine that, and then, because there are individuals who made those decisions at a certain time in the process. Therefore, we need to do that. But also, there must be systemic recommendations, because at the end, we don't want a repetition of things that have gone wrong. We then will go to these organizations and say, this is where things and how things went wrong, and this is how you can remedy it from happening again in future. And those are some of the things that will happen. But if there are criminalities, then criminality will then have to be referred to the National Prosecuting Authority to be taken forward.
Yeah. How far down do we go in the value chain, Kaizer Kganyago? Let me explain what I mean by that. Of course, as you mentioned, there were people making certain decisions in certain places that ultimately allowed these media briefings to happen. But there's supply chain all the way that cascades down, and people who I imagine benefited. Individuals worked for these establishments at some stage. And if memory serves, I think you were the spokesperson of the SABC at the time yourself.
No, definitely. We will have to look into everything that happened. But as I say, there are people who made decisions, and we are not saying the decisions were wrong. We are saying there is something to investigate. And if people are able to explain themselves and make the investigators understand, therefore we'll be in a position to do that. I see this thing is keeping on coming about myself being there. I was a spokesperson of the SABC, and you must understand, as a spokesperson, you communicate the decisions that are made, and you defend them at the time, because you are working in this organization. And therefore, when you get out of there, you go into another organization and you do the same about the issues that are raised. Therefore, it is not about me. It will never be about me, but it is about the investigation that needs to happen.
Sure. I actually wasn't aware that the question keeps coming up, but since you've highlighted that yourself, I mean, are you worried about the optics, Kaizer? I mean, as a communicator, you know that sometimes it's important for things to look in a certain way so that messages aren't confused or confluenced as things that they're not. A very roundabout way of me asking the question, but it's more about the optics of what happened then and what seems to be taking place now.
No, definitely. I think it is opportune to educate the people. It is the same as you do, Ayanda. If a player was playing for Kaizer Chiefs and goes to Sundowns, you cannot expect him not to score against Kaizer Chiefs because now he's playing for a different team. This is how things happen, and unfortunately, it should never be about me. I'm not the investigator here. The investigators will do what they're supposed to do. I don't even get involved in the investigation process.
Fair enough. How much money are we talking in this instance? I mean, I think I read as I was preparing for this interview, in some instances, Eskom paying as much as R1 million for one breakfast session, as much as 46 times. Is that correct?
Yeah, the thing is, these might be big monies because estimation so far is saying that the SABC might have lost about 20 million, but it might be more. Therefore, we have got to be very clear when we get into the investigation. That is why this element of the sponsorship, because all of those that sponsored were state-owned institutions and they fall within the mandate of the SIU investigation. We will then have a good figure and we'll also understand whether processes were followed to make those decisions or not.
Yeah. Whilst we have you on, I mean, I think recently there was also reports around a proclamation for the SIU to investigate certain contracts in the Eastern Cape Health Department. The former health ombud has highlighted the Eastern Cape as being amongst the most dysfunctional in the country. Are you able to shed a bit of light around just the nature of those kind of investigations? Because there are apparently about 19 contracts in your crosshairs.
Yes, we are investigating about 19 contracts in the Department of Health in the Eastern Cape. But what is very peculiar about this particular transaction is the fact that all of these 19 cases or 19 contracts were given to one company. And that one company belongs to somebody whose mother is the head, or is not necessarily head, but works in the Department of Health, in the HR department, and was seen to have been influential in making sure that this contract, they are small contracts, but they were given to the company that is owned by the daughter. And there was conflict of interest that was shown in this particular instance.
Yeah. I mean, the question that always comes up whenever we speak to you about these major investigations, Kaizer, is just the extent to which any of this money could ever be recouped. You know, in cases like the Eastern Cape, many people will say the damage is done. If there was corruption and maladministration, we are seeing ordinary people pay the ultimate cost in some instances.
No, definitely. Ordinary people pay the cost, but we would have seen as the SIU in our last week we were presenting our annual report to Parliament, and we indicated that in one financial year we were able to recoup about 8.4 billion rand that came back and as part of savings that we would have done and cash in the bank account and so on. And those are the things that we do so that the money comes back and is used for what it was intended to. Once we find that something has gone wrong, where you have used the money, we then say we will then divest you from being paid the money if it is not paid. If it is paid, we will then say, how much did you spend? And what was the profit? Because the contract is unlawful, the profit must be brought back so that it can be used for other things that the public of South Africa needs to be used for.
All right, the SIU, busy as ever, it seems. Kaizer Kganyago, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. We appreciate your time. Kaizer Kganyago is the spokesperson of the Special Investigating Units. Of course, those probes very important, and we'll certainly be watching that story right till its end.